1200 CE in the Sonoran Desert's 45 degrees Celsius summer heat, you stand beside a Hopi adobe pueblo, where thick earthen walls must block relentless solar warmth inside. The Hopi adobe pueblo began cooling at its bricks, where sun-baked adobe density forced midday heat to travel slowly through compacted earth before reaching air. As sunlight intensified, the Hopi adobe pueblo relied on thick, south-facing walls, extending heat pathways so solar warmth stalled within earth long before interiors warmed. Covering those walls, the Hopi adobe pueblo applied mud plaster exteriors that absorbed early sunlight first, storing warmth at surfaces while cooler adobe beneath remained protected. Above living rooms, the Hopi adobe pueblo spread flat, earthen roofs that received direct overhead sun, concentrating heat into roof mass instead of immediate interior air. To slow that flow, the Hopi adobe pueblo layered deep soil across roofs, forcing captured heat to migrate gradually downward through packed earth before ceilings warmed. Along roof edges, the Hopi adobe pueblo raised parapets which cast shifting shadows, shortening periods of direct sunlight, striking exposed earthen roof surfaces during afternoon's hours. At ground level, the Hopi adobe pueblo narrowed doorways intentionally, limiting the volume of scorching exterior air capable of spilling into shaded interiors during daytime hours. These openings were recessed deeply into thick walls of the Hopi adobe pueblo, forming shaded entry pockets where sunlight never directly reached thresholds inside rooms beyond. Light penetration remained limited because the Hopi adobe pueblo carved only small window openings, reducing exposed surface area available for solar heat entry each day cycle. Each window sat within deep recesses of the Hopi adobe pueblo's walls, blocking high summer sun angles before rays reached interior floors during peak hours daily. Room placement inside the Hopi adobe pueblo followed east-west alignment, reducing how much wall surface faced the sun during hottest noon periods each day cycle. On the northern edge, the Hopi adobe pueblo positioned walls directly against shaded cliff faces, keeping large adobe surfaces permanently cool throughout long summer afternoons daily. Vertical stacking defined the Hopi adobe pueblo, with upper dwelling levels casting continuous shadows that protected lower rooms from direct sun throughout the day cycle daily. Heat first entered these upper levels of the Hopi adobe pueblo, where thick adobe absorbed warmth long before it drifted downward into cooler lower rooms below. Inside each structure, the Hopi adobe pueblo built thick interior adobe partitions, adding more earth mass to capture incoming heat before air temperatures increased inside rooms. Beneath these walls, the Hopi adobe pueblo packed earth floors tightly, allowing dense soil to absorb large daytime heat loads across interior living spaces' daily cycle. When desert air cooled after sunset, the Hopi adobe pueblo's floors released stored warmth slowly back into surrounding rooms throughout the evening hours each night cycle. To limit solar gain earlier, the Hopi adobe pueblo coated exterior walls with white clay wash reflecting intense sunlight outward during long summer days' daily cycle. This reflective surface on the Hopi adobe pueblo was continually repaired, sealing cracks that otherwise funneled hot air inside through damaged wall joints each season cycle. Across roof surfaces, the Hopi adobe pueblo carved shallow drainage grooves, directing rainwater away to preserve insulating soil layers from erosion and compaction over time cycles. Even wall shapes mattered within the Hopi adobe pueblo, where rounded corners reduced flat areas receiving concentrated sunlight throughout the afternoon hours of each day cycle. Near the ground, the Hopi adobe pueblo thickened base walls dramatically, blocking heat rising upward from sun-heated soil outside the structure during peak hours. Daily, sleeping platforms inside the Hopi adobe pueblo were raised above floors, keeping bodies farther from stored ground heat during the warmest periods of the day cycle. Ceilings throughout the Hopi adobe pueblo remained relatively low, limiting how much hot air could accumulate overhead within interior living spaces during daytime hours' daily cycle. Warm air was directed upward inside the Hopi adobe pueblo, towards central smoke openings, cut through earthen roofs to escape naturally outside each hot afternoon cycle. Additional roof vents in the Hopi adobe pueblo, aligned with prevailing desert breezes, pulling heated interior air outward, while cooler shaded air entered inside below simultaneously. These ventilation channels within the Hopi adobe pueblo were lined with hardened clay, preserving narrow airflow geometry despite erosion from wind over long periods of use. Within thick walls, the Hopi adobe pueblo carved interior alcoves reaching deep into cooler adobe cores protected from direct heat flow throughout the day. Cycle daily. Storage niches positioned deeper inside the Hopi adobe pueblo's walls stayed cooler due to surrounding thermal mass absorbing incoming heat first, before air warmed inside rooms. Vertical circulation openings in the Hopi adobe pueblo were cut only through shaded wall faces, avoiding sun-heated surfaces that transferred additional heat into rooms below. Instead of interior stairs, the Hopi adobe pueblo used exterior ladders, preventing hot air movement through internal shafts between stacked living levels during daytime heating cycles. Many dwellings inside the Hopi adobe pueblo shared continuous walls, reducing the total surface exposed directly to sunlight across the settlement throughout each day cycle daily. At the center, the Hopi adobe pueblo formed enclosed courtyards where tall walls created shade and guided cooling airflow through interior circulation spaces all afternoon long. Within the Hopi adobe pueblo, courtyard walls angled pale surfaces inward, reflecting solar radiation away from adjoining rooms, keeping shaded interiors cooler during prolonged afternoon heat. Extending from roofs, the Hopi adobe pueblo built earthen overhangs that projected shadows downward, shielding vertical walls from direct midday sunlight exposure during hottest hours daily. Supporting this mass, the Hopi adobe pueblo embedded thick timber beams across ceilings, carrying heavy soil layers that functioned as thermal insulation above rooms during summer. These beams were recessed within the Hopi adobe pueblo's roof structure, preventing direct sunlight from heating exposed wood surfaces and transferring warmth indoors during afternoons daily. Between every brick, the Hopi adobe pueblo packed mud mortar tightly, forming a continuous dense wall mass that slowed heat movement inward throughout daytime hours cycle. Across exterior surfaces, the Hopi adobe pueblo frequently replastered walls, preserving light-colored finishes that reflected sunlight instead of absorbing thermal energy during summer days continually. Below ground level, the Hopi adobe pueblo constructed thick foundation courses, isolating upper adobe walls from heat stored within sun-baked soil during long afternoons daily. Throughout construction, the Hopi adobe pueblo standardized adobe brick sizes, creating compact uniform units that maximize predictable thermal storage within walls across entire structures consistently daily. After molding, the Hopi adobe pueblo dried bricks slowly under controlled sun exposure, producing dense, low-porosity blocks that resisted rapid heating during hot days outside. Walls within the Hopi adobe pueblo were built in layered courses, creating thick cross-sections where cooler interior cores remained protected from external heat flow daily. Each year, the Hopi adobe pueblo replaced roof soil layers, restoring insulation depth that had compacted or eroded under weather exposure during seasonal maintenance cycles regularly. Door lintels inside the Hopi adobe pueblo were set at heights guiding rising warm air toward vents, rather than trapping heat within occupied rooms during afternoons. Vertical stair passages in the Hopi adobe pueblo remained narrow, limiting the volume of heated air transferring upward between stacked levels during peak heat hours daily. Interior walls of the Hopi adobe pueblo curved gently, shaping airflow paths that directed warm rising air toward roof ventilation openings above living spaces during afternoons. Because of shading and thermal mass, lower rooms of the Hopi Adobe Pueblo consistently remain the coolest spaces during daytime hours for daily activity inside structures. After sunset, upper rooms of the Hopi Adobe Pueblo release stored heat rapidly, becoming cooler sleeping areas through the night as roof mass cooled downward slowly. Even surface texture contributed within the Hopi Adobe Pueblo, where rough adobe finishes created countless micro-shadows, reducing localized heating across walls daily during sunlight hours. Site placement mattered as the Hopi Adobe Pueblo was built beneath cliffs, receiving extended rock shadows across structures every afternoon during hottest summer months each year. These stone cliff faces beside the Hopi Adobe Pueblo absorbed intense sunlight first, preventing direct solar radiation from reaching adobe walls through much daytime exposure period. Closer to the ground, the Hopi Adobe Pueblo increased wall thickness, where heat concentrated near sun-warmed soil surfaces during peak afternoon hours. Each day cycle, these thicker lower courses within the Hopi Adobe Pueblo slowed upward heat transfer, delaying warmth before it reached interior spaces above ground levels during daytime heating. Across roof surfaces, the Hopi Adobe Pueblo compacted earth tightly, preventing rapid temperature spikes under direct summer sunlight during long exposed afternoons, each hot season cycle. Moisture retained within the Hopi Adobe Pueblo's roof soil increased thermal mass, keeping roof layers cooler for longer periods during daytime heat exposure each cycle daily. Sloped roof drainage within the Hopi Adobe Pueblo prevented water pooling, preserving soil insulation thickness by avoiding compaction over time after seasonal rains during summer storms. At night, adobe wall pores inside the Hopi Adobe Pueblo trapped cooler air, storing lower temperatures within thick earth mass until morning heat returned outside again. When sunlight returned, the Hopi Adobe Pueblo released this stored coolness slowly, delaying interior warming as exterior temperatures climbed through early afternoon hours each hot day. The Hopi Adobe Pueblo arranged multiple rooms in sequence, forming buffered transitions where heat moved gradually between shaded spaces instead of sudden changes inside structures daily. Interior doorways within the Hopi Adobe Pueblo aligned deliberately, allowing cooler air paths to flow smoothly. Through connected rooms during daytime ventilation cycles, each afternoon period, shaded courtyard corridors inside the Hopi Adobe Pueblo drew cooler air inward, feeding ventilation through interior living spaces during peak afternoon heat hours, each day cycle. As this air warmed, the Hopi Adobe Pueblo allowed rising heat to exit naturally through roof vents, positioned above central room spaces during ventilation flow cycles. This daily airflow cycle within the Hopi Adobe Pueblo steadily pushed accumulated heat outward during the hottest afternoon hours, across interior spaces each summer day period. Instead of internal shafts, the Hopi Adobe Pueblo embedded ladders into exterior walls, avoiding sun-heated interior surfaces that transferred heat inward during movement between levels. Rooftop access points in the Hopi Adobe Pueblo remained narrow, minimizing open areas where hot air exchanged rapidly with interior rooms below during daylight hours daily. Along roof perimeters, the Hopi Adobe Pueblo raised parapet walls that shielded roof edges, preventing direct sunlight from striking vulnerable soil layers during peak afternoon hours daily. Over time, the Hopi Adobe Pueblo's roof soil compacted under its own weight, increasing insulation density and slowing heat transfer through thicker compressed earth layers above rooms. Within vertical walls, the Hopi Adobe Pueblo layered adobe courses deeply, extending the physical distance heat needed to travel before reaching interior living spaces during daylight. Because of this layering, inner wall cores inside the Hopi Adobe Pueblo remained noticeably cooler throughout afternoons, protected by surrounding earth mass absorbing incoming heat first. Surface maintenance continued as the Hopi Adobe Pueblo smoothed plaster repeatedly, sealing cracks that could leak hot exterior air directly into interior spaces during summer days. The light-colored clay coating of the Hopi Adobe Pueblo reduced how much solar energy walls absorbed, reflecting a significant portion of sunlight outward instead of inward. Wall geometry further assisted cooling, as the Hopi Adobe Pueblo curved exterior surfaces slightly, redirecting sunlight angles away from direct perpendicular heating exposure. Around doorways, the Hopi Adobe Pueblo thickened adobe jambs, creating shaded interior edges that block direct sunlight from reaching floors just inside entrances. The depth of each recessed doorway within the Hopi Adobe Pueblo controlled how far sunlight could penetrate, stopping heat before it reached interior rooms during midday. Raised thresholds at entrances of the Hopi Adobe Pueblo blocked hot air rising from sun-heated ground surfaces from flowing indoors during peak temperature hours. Across rooftops, the Hopi Adobe Pueblo's timber beams cast alternating shadow bands, forming cool surface zones between sunlit strips during long summer afternoons daily. The thick soil roof of the Hopi Adobe Pueblo also prevented rapid heat loss at night, keeping interior temperatures from dropping suddenly after sunset hours. As evening arrived, the Hopi Adobe Pueblo retained warmth gradually from walls and roofs, maintaining stable interior temperatures through cooler nighttime periods. Shared roof surfaces between adjoining rooms in the Hopi Adobe Pueblo reduced total sun-exposed area, limiting how much heat structures absorbed each day. Where dwellings connected, the Hopi Adobe Pueblo formed continuous thermal mass blocks, creating shaded networks that protected inner walls from direct sunlight exposure. Stacked room arrangements in the Hopi Adobe Pueblo created controlled vertical temperature gradients, guiding heat upward toward vented upper spaces naturally. Lower floors of the Hopi Adobe Pueblo stabilized cooler temperatures through thick earth mass, acting as thermal reservoirs against daytime heat intrusion. Upper floors of the Hopi Adobe Pueblo vented accumulated heat faster during evening. Airflow cycles, cooling living spaces above more quickly after sunset. Throughout daylight, adobe within the Hopi Adobe Pueblo absorbed heat slowly, preventing sudden interior temperature spikes despite intense exterior solar exposure. The thick walls of the Hopi Adobe Pueblo then released this warmth only after sunset, delaying heat return into rooms during hottest daylight hours. Nighttime cooling across the Hopi Adobe Pueblo reset wall temperatures, preparing dense adobe mass to absorb heat again the following day cycle. Repeated heating and cooling strengthened adobe within the Hopi Adobe Pueblo, compacting structure and improving long-term thermal performance over years of use. Maintained wall mass across the Hopi Adobe Pueblo preserved consistent cooling behavior, ensuring predictable heat movement through earth materials season after season. Within courtyards, shade inside the Hopi Adobe Pueblo shifted gradually as the sun moved, preventing prolonged heating of any single wall. Surface daily. These moving shadow patterns across the Hopi Adobe Pueblo reduce continuous heat exposure durations, limiting overall thermal buildup on walls and roofs. Above, cliff overhangs near the Hopi Adobe Pueblo blocked direct overhead midday sun, especially during summer when solar angles were steepest. With less radiation reaching roofs, the Hopi Adobe Pueblo lowered heat accumulation rates across earthen surfaces during peak afternoon periods each day. Natural rock shade beside the Hopi Adobe Pueblo preserved cooler adobe wall surfaces, shielding structures from long hours of direct sunlight exposure. Careful Pueblo placement maximized these permanent shaded orientations, positioning the Hopi Adobe Pueblo where cliffs offered consistent solar protection throughout the day. Building clusters within the Hopi Adobe Pueblo created extensive mutual shadow networks. where one structure shielded another from sun exposure continuously. Interlocked adobe forms reduced isolated sun, struck surfaces, ensuring most walls remained partially shaded throughout daylight hours inside the settlement. Together, the continuous adobe mass of the Hopi Adobe Pueblo acted as a unified thermal buffer, absorbing and releasing heat gradually across all connected structures. Heat within the Hopi Adobe Pueblo moved predictably through layered adobe each day, flowing slowly instead of surging rapidly into interior spaces. In total form, the Hopi Adobe Pueblo functioned as an integrated passive cooling architecture, where every wall, roof, and courtyard shaped heat behavior. By late morning, the Hopi Adobe Pueblo had already enacted multiple interlocking thermal responses. Sun-baked brick slowed heat movement through walls. Thick, south-facing facades extended the path of solar warmth, and mud plaster surfaces absorbed and delayed radiation. Roof mass accumulated overhead heat, while deep soil layers and parapet shadows further delayed conduction. Doors, recessed and narrow, controlled air exchange, while small, deeply set windows blocked high-angle sunlight. Room orientation along east-west axes, northern walls against shaded cliffs, and stacked dwelling levels all structured sunlight and airflow predictably, protecting lower rooms and interior partitions. Within, packed earth floors stored thermal energy and released it gradually after sunset, while white clay coatings and repeated plaster maintenance reflected radiation and sealed fissures that might transfer heat indoors. Courtyards, roof overhangs, and light-colored curved exterior walls redistributed sunlight away from living spaces, while timber beams and soil layering added insulation. Recessed doorways, thick jambs, elevated thresholds, and narrow stair passages further controlled airflow and limited internal heat exchange. Interior alcoves, storage niches, and layered walls maintained cooler cores, while roof vents and smoke openings directed warmer air upward into prevailing breezes. Shared walls, interlocked dwellings, and clustered construction created mutual shade networks, reducing isolated exposure. An adobe mass functioned as a predictable thermal buffer, releasing retained warmth only after sunset. Seasonal maintenance, soil replacement, and continued masonry care preserved these properties over time. Collectively, these structural features produced an integrated system where every adobe course, every courtyard shadow, every vent, and every roof overhang participated in the same physical logic. Each adaptation solved a precise problem imposed by desert heat, responding to sunlight, air movement, and the material properties of Earth itself. Within this single pueblo, the patterns of human ingenuity, selection of materials, geometry, placement, and maintenance exemplified broader human capacity to assemble environments into functioning thermal systems without external technology. In the quiet hours after sunset, as the pueblo released stored warmth into cooling air, the structure itself became a record of accumulated knowledge, a silent articulation of human skill in shaping heat, mass, and airflow to meet persistent environmental pressures.